What's behind Erdogan's gamble? Turkey's president defying the standard prescriptions for inflation, the country's worst in nearly 2 decades. Instead, burning through currency reserves and central bank governors to keep interest rates low. As those reserves dwindle and lines lengthen at subsidized bakeries, we'll be asking about the impact on ordinary citizens and why Erdogan is holding out, with cues to booming exports, which are, he says, the flip side of a plummeting lira. Add to that the nods of a religiously conservative president to the principles of Islam, which frowns upon usury and the profiteering of finance. We'll ask about the timing, still a ways away from the 2023 elections, and amid a thaw in regional relations, what it all means. Erdogan to visit Saudi Arabia next month, and its crown prince seen here recently bearing the hatchet with Turkey ally Qatar. Next month's trip will be a first since the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside of the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Again, the question is, why now? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Erdogan's gamble, and joining us from Istanbul, former Turkish diplomat Sinan Ülgen, director of the think tank EDAM, that's the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies. Happy New Year to you, Sinan.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Year as well to Yusuf Arim, Turkey analyst at TRT World. Welcome back.
Happy New Year, Francois.
And from Ankara, Refet Gürkenak, economics professor at Bilkent University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to all.
All right. Happy New Year. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation throughout the year on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 36% was the official inflation rate when it came out Monday, the official inflation rate for the year 2021. But you can easily double that number for essential staple items. Recep Tayyip Erdogan giving his take at a trade conference in Istanbul on Monday. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
Turkey's annual inflation rate is at its highest in the 19 years Recep Tayyip Erdogan has ruled. The surge in prices is rattling consumers, with people having to think twice about what they buy.
We used to buy a lot of things with 100 lira. Now we go to the market, choose 2 things, give 100 lira and leave. Prices are increasing so much. Our purchasing power is constantly decreasing.
The Turkish Statistical Institute says the country's annual consumer price inflation rose by 36.08% in December, up from 21.3% the month before. The surge was driven by higher transport, food and drink, and import costs. Inflation has been rising as the Turkish lira has lost ground. It slid to 44% of its value against the US dollar last year. The Turkish president is being blamed for lowering borrowing costs to boost growth, even though economists say higher interest rates are the way to tame inflation. Responding to the higher inflation figures, he railed against elites who, he says, have profited from crises.
While the nation was losing, while retirees, civil servants, workers, business people, tradespeople and producers were losing, an elite minority who have benefited from the crises have continued to win, flourish and increase their wealth.
The economic crisis has hit Erdogan's opinion polls ahead of a tough election due for no later than mid-2023.
Sinan Ülgen, first of all, what do you make when you hear the words we just heard from Turkey's president?
Well, this is not a totally new rhetoric. We have known that President Erdogan has a distaste of interest rates. And especially high interest rates. The problem is that, of course, it is understandable that he would want to lower interest rates, that, with a view to boost economic growth. However, you need to bring down inflation first in order to do that. And that is the dilemma, because he tends to believe that he needs to lower interest rates to lower inflation. Many other people believe that first you need to lower interest rates by raising inflation, by raising the interest rate, and then you can lower it afterwards. So that's the dilemma, really.
That's the dilemma, and the pressure we thought had been growing the past weeks. But we see he's sticking to his guns, even though we saw the Turkish lira again fall against the dollar this Tuesday.
Yes, and he will continue to stick to his guns because there's been now a new narrative on a novel approach to the economy. It's called the Turkish growth model. And it's basically predicated on the assumption that low interest rates will lead to a depreciation of the domestic currency, which will make Turkey more competitive internationally. That would boost exports, industrial production, and ultimately employment and incomes. And this is the economic model that the government is pushing. And therefore, until they realize that this economic will not yield the type of outcome that they hope, there will be a degree of instability in Turkey. And we shall see that, I would say, very much unfortunately, in terms of rising inflation.
Professor Gürkenak, we heard in that Monday speech by the president, he touted the fact that there had been a 1/3 increase in exports last year, and saying it's all about exports and that we will reap the benefits of it. To talk us through that, please.
Well, export-led growth is nothing new in emerging economies. And it's important to keep remembering that Turkey is a country like any other country. And, capitalism is the same around the world. And when one country comes out and says, well, we're going to do this thing and it's going to have all different results than everywhere else, in general, it doesn't work because we kind of understand the mechanisms and we understand the causality between the aggregates that we are interested in. So export-led growth is possible, but that requires a strong exporting sector and good productivity in that sector. If you want to substitute these with a poor exchange rate, then on the one side, this is a terms of trade shock to yourself in the sense that it's nothing to be proud of, that you're selling your labor and your goods at ridiculously cheap rates to the rest of the world.
Just talk us through that. Who benefits and who gets hurt the most by this policy?
Well, if you are an exporter whose production is mostly within the country, briefly you gain, right? Because your lira costs, domestic currency costs, and prices are the same. But in the eyes of the foreigners, because your money has lost so much value, your goods seem cheaper, and therefore you get to export more. Now, to the extent that your production requires imported goods as well, this effect is negated because whatever is being imported is as much expensive now. And one thing we know well is, Turkey is a open economy, and our production is very much internationalized in that we import a lot of intermediate goods. In particular, we import a lot of energy, right? Because we're not an oil-producing country, and we have to import that. So whenever the lira depreciates, energy prices go up. That hurts production. We import capital goods, machinery. Whenever the lira depreciates, investment becomes harder because, even if interest rates are lower, and I would like to note that they aren't, whatever you want to buy is imported and they become more expensive. And so those effects negate a lot of the thought of benefits of the poor exchange rate in exporting. But even when this works, soon after, because all imported goods are now more expensive, inflation begins to go up. And so very rightly, your workers begin to ask for wage increases, and therefore your costs, domestic costs, also go up. So whatever benefit there is, it's usually short-lived. And one thing that we know fairly well is, in the aggregate, Turkish exports are not all that sensitive to the exchange rate. They are sensitive to growth in Western Europe. That's our largest export destination. And when Germany and France are growing, when economic activity is fast there, we export at most any exchange rate. When you're stagnating, then we don't get to export much, regardless of the exchange rate. The exchange rate, however, affects our imports a lot. And I assume this is something you will ask anyway. The point that the current account deficit, the trade deficit is going to narrow. It will narrow because when you make goods produced elsewhere in the world prohibitively expensive to your customers, to your own population, of course they don't get to enjoy these things, they don't get to buy these things. And your national economy slows. Since you don't produce as much, you don't import as much. So Turkish imports are going to fall very quickly because of the exchange rate. But the increase in the exports, more than the exchange rate, is driven by the rebound from the COVID recession in the rest of Europe.
In the rest of Europe. Yusuf Erim, you've heard the panel so far, pretty down on this policy, this single-minded policy of the president. Is it for you to do with economics that he's doing this, or is it to do with politics or his personal religious beliefs?
I think it's a mixture of all of them. Now, the Turkish president comes from a conservative thought process, school of thought, and as such, he's always believed in low interest rates, and he's also believed that interest rates are against religion. So this is something that he's desired. This is no secret. He's been talking about low interest rates ever since he came to power in 2003. And after the economic miracle years, quote unquote, that 2004 to 2008 period, we saw inflation creep up. We saw FX rates creep back up, and the Turkish president wanted to go back to that economic growth model of that 2005 period. And that 2005 period, when we look at that period, it was a credit-based growth model, low interest rates, allowing contractors, allowing businessmen to take out loans, pursue projects, large economic growth, unemployment very, very low. So these interest rates being low, it had a very positive trickle-down effect. Now, of course, inflationary pressure was much lower than, especially global inflationary pressure. So the market allowed for lower interest rates without too much pressure on foreign currency. Right now, we're in the middle of a global inflation problem. Everybody's feeling this. China's feeling it, Russia's feeling it, the US, Canada, the EU, everybody's feeling it. So when you undertake an ambitious economic transformation, while there's inflationary pressure, of course there's going to be some trade-offs, and these are the challenges that are being posed. But,
why is he doing it?
President,
why is he doing it now then? As you say, Yusuf, it's happening in the midst of the highest inflation globally we've seen worldwide in decades.
I think he's wanted to do this for a long time. I think he wanted to do this in 2013. There was a little political turmoil back then. He wanted to do this in 2018. He was faced with the Brunson crisis, which resulted in a huge surge in the US dollar. At the end of the day, he wants to do this. He's very, very dedicated to rolling out this economic model right now, and he's going to continue. And as I was saying, there are positive trade-offs, there's negative trade-offs, but he has a exotic financial toolkit that he can, instrument kit that he can roll out, and we've seen it right now. We've seen this savings accounts pegged to the US dollar, the largest Turkish lira gain in over 40 years. We're seeing a 50% increase in minimum wage. We're seeing a 30% increase across the board in government salaries. So yes, inflation is going up, but he is protecting salaries of the citizens against inflation right now. And let's not forget, these inflation figures are snapshots. It's a snapshot of this month. It's a snapshot of next month. This is a more long-term, more broader policy. He's trying to transform the economic model. And right now, at a time during the pandemic when the global...
Are people standing online to buy those at those subsidized bakeries? That's not a snapshot. That's real.
Look, at the end of the day, when there is inflationary pressure, yes. But right now, there are steps being taken to ease this inflationary pressure. And I think this problem coming towards the end of the year is perfect timing right around January, because you do have the yearly increase in salary, so everyone will take a deep breath and be able to relax January, February, March, and onwards. So we are seeing that the average citizen is going to have that increase reflected this month. So there is going to be increased spending and easing from the citizens' daily needs. But back to very quickly what I wanted to say. In the middle of a pandemic, at a time when global supply lines are being redrawn, we're seeing Turkey invest a lot in logistics, whether it be the east-west corridor, whether it be the north-south corridor, whether it be infrastructure inside. And I think this economic model being put together with the corridors that Turkey's trying to create and the lower inflation rate and the growth inside, I see where the president's trying to go with this. Will he be successful? Will he not? Time will tell. But I do see where he's trying to go with this, how he's trying to position Turkey as a manufacturing power for the region.
All right, you mentioned something. I just want to ask Refet Gurnenanak about this. It was 2 weeks ago, this scheme that was introduced by the government, the state protecting local deposits from losses against hard currencies from abroad. And as Yusuf was mentioning, the Turkish lira briefly went back up. That scheme, I'm reading the latest figures from today. They're up to the equivalent of $6.4 billion now that are back in deposits in this forex protected scheme. Is it going to work?
That's a ticking bomb that's going to create a lot of problems for us down the road. But before I get there, allow me to answer a question that you didn't ask, which is which interest rate is being lowered? And it's really important to note that central banks, and the Turkish central bank is no special in this regard, control one lousy interest rate, which is usually an interbank rate. And of course, you and I are not banks. We're not in the interbank market. We don't see this interest rate. We don't use this interest rate. And this is called the monetary transmission mechanism, that by affecting this tiny interest rate in this tiny market, you affect the rest of the interest rates in your economy. But if you're doing outlandish policies, that transmission mechanism breaks down. So the Turkish central bank began to reduce interest rates in September and took interest rates from 19% to 14% as inflation was going up from 15% to 36% now. But you ought to ask, well, do you at least have lower interest rates? And the answer is no. No deposit rate, no lending rates, no treasury borrowing rate is lower. And in fact, these are much higher. This is such unfortunately lousy monetary policy that the central bank has lost control of interest rates in the economy. And therefore, the Turkish treasury's borrowing rate, for example, even at short maturities, like in 2 years, they have gone up and by many hundreds of basis points. So the outcome is inflation is going up, the lira has depreciated like crazy, there's this feeling of loss of control and crisis. And not even interest rates are lower in the end. So, I see no trade-off here. This is just a lose-lose-lose policy that we have. And out of obstinacy, we're not reversing this, keeping the policy rate low. And people are, when your central bank essentially says, I'm not backing my own currency, people flock to things that they think they are going to keep their value, such as other currencies. That central banks, when they see inflation, say, well, I'll raise interest rates, I'll make sure that my currency keeps its value. Now, to stop this, the government said, okay, rather than buying dollars, have deposits in liras, and if at the end of your deposit period, and the terms are at least 3 months and at most a year, at the end of this term, the interest you receive is lower than the depreciation of the currency, I will make up the difference for you. So I'm giving you a guarantee that you will not lose against foreign exchange.
And that's the ticking time bomb that you're...
That's the ticking time bomb in the sense that so far the data suggests this has not led to people selling their foreign currency. This has not really led to the solution of foreign currency deposits. But regular domestic currency, lira deposits, of course, immediately get converted into this new type of deposit because the government is giving you insurance, effectively giving you an option without pricing it. It's a gift, and people take this gift.
People take the gift for now, but it could be a ticking time bomb. I want to bring in on this.
Ticking time bomb in the sense, let me say this one sentence and you're going to understand immediately.
Sure.
Because currently the lira, it had gone down all the way to $1 buying 18 liras. Now it's about 13 and a half. But if a few months down the road, the lira depreciates again, not only you have the bad outcome of the depreciation, but the treasury is looking at a huge outlay because they have given this guarantee and now they have to pay for this.
And now they're going to have to.
And that's not a small promise.
Yeah, right. Now, on the sidelines, we heard earlier the president of Turkey speaking at that trade conference Monday in Istanbul. On the sidelines of it, Recep Tayyip Erdogan was asked about export issues with Saudi Arabia. And there he made an announcement that surprised a lot of people. He says he'll be going to Saudi Arabia next month. Quote, they expect me in February. They made a promise, and I will pay a visit to Saudi Arabia in February. Now, of course, relations went south fast in October of 2018, Sinan Ülgen, when journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered inside of the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. There has been a relative thaw. What we saw, Saudi ally, the UAE, its crown prince visit Turkey back in November. What's this about? Is this about politics, or is it about, again, shoring up partnerships for business deals?
Well, it's in a way all of the above, in the sense that what we have seen recently in Turkish foreign policy, and here recently means about a year really, since the start of 2021, is really a recalibration. Because the foreign policy before 2021 did not really yield the type of outcome, landscape that Turkey aspired to. It led to Turkey's regional isolation. It led to tarnished relationship with Turkey's partners in the West. And finally, somewhat belatedly, there was indeed an acknowledgement in Ankara that things need to be changed. And since the beginning of last year, we have seen efforts to mend those relations, primarily with countries in the region. And this is how there has been now a new era of rapprochement with the UAE. And now in February, there will be this visit to Saudi Arabia, which is yet another sign of the willingness of the Turkish government to reach out to some of these regional partners. Of course, it remains to be seen, whether this goodwill will be reciprocated by these capitals. With some of them, it's been easier. That, as I said, has been the case with Abu Dhabi. But there's also ongoing efforts with regard to Egypt, with Cairo, with Israel, that have not really produced the type of very tangible, palpable results. But nonetheless, there is indeed this intent in Ankara to recalibrate foreign policy. Some of it is due to the foreign policy outlook, but some of it is also due to the economic outlook, given that Turkey now has higher economic vulnerabilities. So there is indeed an intention that by mending the bilateral relationship with some of these key countries, Turkey can now attract some of the investment, particularly FDI investment, that it very much needs.
And that'll happen even though there's still the cases ongoing in absentia of the killers of Jamal Khashoggi.
Yes, that is indeed an issue. The other issue, which we haven't discussed, is one of the reasons why the bilateral relationship became under stress was also Turkey's support to the Muslim Brotherhood. That position has also changed to some extent, perhaps not fully, but to the extent that it has, it's been helpful in mending the relationship with the Gulf countries.
And at the same time, you have Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, and we saw in those pictures again, visiting Qatar at the beginning of last month. What's going on? Because there used to be, as you described it, Sinan, that fault line between countries that were for or against the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, I mean, a lot of this is also due to both regional dynamics, but also global dynamics, namely the fact that you have a new, now, a year old, but nonetheless a relatively new administration in the United States that has a very different Middle East policy, is driving this type of rapprochement, firstly between Qatar and the Saudi. Some of the very deep divisions are being healed, but also this dynamic is also at the background of the rapprochement between Turkey and the Gulf countries, because they all look at the region. They understand that the Biden government has a very different position, that especially for the Gulf countries, this sort of unconditional security blanket that was the case under Trump is no more. So there is also a willingness on the side of those countries to rehash the relationship, particularly with a country an important and a strong country like Turkey in the region.
Yusuf Arim, you agree that Joe Biden replacing Donald Trump changes the whole dynamic between Turkey and those Gulf states?
I think that was a very solid analysis by Mr. Ülgen, and I'd just like to add a little more. I think not only Biden coming in the perception that the United States is shifting towards the Pacific as it now classifies China as its #1 national security threat, but this was already happening under Trump. So seeing it more pronounced under Biden, the general understanding right now in the region is this is not just a partisan decision. This has now become U.S. state policy for the next maybe 1 to 2 decades. So everyone's reshuffling and reformulating their policies right now. I think there was 2 very big eye-opening events in the Middle East, at least for Saudi Arabia. One was the Aramco attack. I think the Aramco attack and the muted U.S. response in defense of Saudi Arabia, and the general understanding that the divide that was created between the Arab Spring and the threat perception of the Muslim Brotherhood towards Saudi Arabia or towards any of the Gulf monarchies has declined. So the Gulf monarchies don't view the Muslim Brotherhood as a player that can threaten them anymore, and they view Iran as growing stronger and stronger, especially with a possible return to the nuclear deal. So Turkey has become a very attractive actor to them, with one of those divides being gone, and a major security provider quite possibly being less engaged in the region for the next couple of decades. So when you look at your foreign policy portfolio of actors in the region, Turkey stands out. And when we look at Turkey and Iran, do they have a cordial relationship with each other? Well, they have a very business-like relationship with each other. But at the end of the day, their presence throughout the region is very similar to oil and water. When they fill up voids together, they separate, and they have very clear-cut lines. You see that in Syria, you see that in Iraq. They're very, very clear-cut lines, and they don't encroach on each other's territory. So Turkey is a natural competitor to Iran, and it's also a natural containment presence to Iran as well.
I'm just curious, do you think ordinary citizens in Turkey will be unfazed when they see that first photograph of Recep Tayyip Erdogan sitting next to Mohammed bin Salman?
I think that Turkish citizens will understand that the Turkish head of state is doing what he needs to do for the best of his country. I'm sure it's not going to be easy for him to go and if they meet directly with each other, it's not going to be easy for him. But at the end of the day, he's doing what is good for his country, and that's what every head of state is mandated to, work for the interests of their country, and that's what he's doing.
I want to get back to the business side of it. Refet Gurnikak, when you see Recep Tayyip Erdogan with that warming of relations with Gulf states, is it a shift in terms of what are the markets for Turkey?
This is not something I'm an expert on, so I'm just going to make a few notes. These are not large export markets for us, but they are important for financing. And it's not different for many other countries either, that because of the oil and natural gas wealth, these countries have funds to invest, and many countries that are looking to borrow, be it the state or the private sector, would like to attract these funds. And so far, that aspect has been more important than the exports because, given the populations, there is only so much you can export to these countries.
Now, getting back to domestic policy, we have Refet Gürnekak in Turkey, elections that are coming up in more than 1 year. So the current bite that ordinary citizens are feeling, could it be a fading memory come election time?
Well, if the policies change, the outcomes will also change. But if the government is going to insist on making the central bank say, I'm not going to stand behind my own currency, it's difficult to see that currency being valuable. And against other monies, that lack of value is seen in the depreciation of the currency. And against goods and services, it's inflation. It's the two sides of the same coin. That if your currency is losing value against other monies, it's going to lose value against goods and services. Or because of high inflation, if it's not buying much in your country, it's not going to buy much of other monies either. So I find it difficult to envision a scenario where the central bank remains in this passive stance and inflation is brought under control. Of course, brute force is possible in terms of price controls and things of that sort, but those then create even larger headaches because, if your firm is told you can't increase your prices, then there's really little incentive for you to do production because your input prices are going up. And so once you start going down that route, oftentimes you end up in a more or less controlled economy, and an economy of Turkey's complexity cannot be controlled this way, and certainly not quickly. So I fail to see how this policy is going to be consistent with an economic progress going towards elections.
Yeah, and Sinan Ülgen, if there's one thing Recep Tayyip Erdogan is not, that is suicidal. He's very astute politically. So does he have time still, do you agree, to cut his losses?
Well, I think that two things. First, I think that he certainly believes in this new economic model of low interest rates, negative real interest rates, depreciation of the domestic currency, turning Turkey more competitive and boosting industrial production, employment, and incomes. He firmly believes in this. And the reason why I think he launched this program has to do with the political landscape, namely in a quite unprecedented way, really, for Turkish politics. Erdogan is now behind in terms of popularity compared to at least three candidates of the opposition. The two mayors, the Ankara mayor and the Istanbul mayor, and the chairwoman of the center-right E Party. So for him, it's very important before elections for Turkey to have a very high growth figure that would create employment and increase incomes. However, as we discussed today, it is, at least to me, very doubtful whether you can engineer this only by way of this, monetary policy. The more likely outcome is that after a few months, the policymakers in Ankara will realize that this is harming the electoral chances and popular support for the government rather than helping it, essentially because it's going to become much more difficult to control inflation. And that's much more important for the Turkish people, because when you have high and rising inflation, that is going to lead to depreciation in living standards, in purchasing power, and that's what people care about.
Yusuf Arim, you agree?
Well, first of all, we have to take into account that elections are going to be sometime in June 2023. So we're talking about a year and a half away, and in Turkish politics, a year and a half is like an eternity. Now, throughout this time, the Turkish lira is going to find a new normal. It's going to find a fair value that accepts lower interest rates. And regardless, inflation today, while it's at, I believe, a little over 30%, from base effect, starting with November of 2022, the base effect and month on month will most likely be much lower. Turkey will be enjoying lower interest rates. The dollar will have found a new fair value that accepts these lower interest rates and accepts these conditions. So When we look at economic indicators like unemployment went down from 13.5% of a high this year to the most recent uninflation print at 11%. Turkey's posting a current account surplus right now. Growth is going to be double digits for 2021. The economic indicators are good. Turkey does not have an economic crisis. Turkey's suffering inflationary pressures, and Turkey has right now a fluctuating foreign currency, but that is going to stabilize over time. Again, this is not something short-term. It's a major overhaul of the economy, and yes, there are going to be some growing pains, but governments don't view things on a day-to-day basis. When they're drawing their economic models, they look at it from a month to month, a year to year, maybe a decade to decade. So we need to understand that we can't be judging this new economic model every day saying, oh, it's good today. Oh, tomorrow the dollar went up to 18, it's bad. Oh, the next day it went down to 13, it's good again. That's not how we can judge an economic model. And the Turkish president understands that economics gets politicians elected in Turkey and across the world. So it's very, very important that this plan is successful for him. And if he's very dedicated to this plan, which it looks like he is, his team has done the homework.
All right, his team has done the homework, you say. Sinan Ülgen, of course, he has one advantage for now, and it's got nothing to do with inflation. It's the fact that the opposition hasn't really crystallized behind a formidable character who can challenge him yet.
Yes, but the elections are still a year and a half away. And secondly, as I've tried to highlight in my previous comments, the opposition now has at least 3 candidates that poll better than Erdogan. And this is unprecedented for Turkish politics. And that's why Erdogan needs to do something economically and give hope to the Turkish people that he will deliver, a better future for the Turkish people. And that's really what's driving this economic program. But as discussed, I think you can't really engineer this vast transformation through monetary policy alone. You need a much more holistic, comprehensive program, and many of those elements are lacking. So I think ultimately, the pragmatist that he is, he will need to revise his goals, Erdogan, and politically, it's going to be an uphill struggle for him, given that as discussed, the political opposition now has candidates that poll better than the president.
Yeah, but again, a lot of time left before that election in mid-2023. Sinan Ülgen, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Istanbul. Same with Yusuf Arim, Refet Gürkenak in the Turkish capital, Ankara. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you very much.